Hello and welcome to this episode of the Hospice Education Podcast. Today we're going to be exploring something that quietly but powerfully shapes how we respond to challenge, feedback, uncertainty and change, our mindset. Whether we realise it or not, the beliefs we hold about our own ability influence how we approach learning, how we cope with mistakes, and even how we see ourselves professionally. I'm joined by Tracey Proctor, a clinical trainer with a strong interest in professional development and lifelong learning. Welcome, Tracey.
Hello, Leanne, and thank you for having me.
Okay, Tracey, so before we move into the practical side of this conversation, I'd really like to start our listeners in where this idea originates. The term growth mindset, we hear is widely used now.
Yeah.
Perhaps you could just explain where the concept comes from and, what the research actually tells us about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the main contributors to the concept of growth mindset originates from the work of Carol Dweck. So she is a psychologist whose research explored how people's beliefs about intelligence and ability influences their behavior, their resilience, and their achievements.
Okay.
So her work really across decades of study, she identified two broad belief systems. So she identified a fixed mindset, which assumes that intelligence and ability are largely static. So, really, that you either have a certain level of ability or you do not. A growth mindset, however, assumes that ability can be developed through effort, strategy, feedback, and persistence.
Okay.
So, really, what her research demonstrated quite clearly is that the belief itself significantly influences how individuals approach learning, how they approach their challenges, and actually even failure. It isn't simply about ability, it's about what we believe ability to be.
Okay, so this isn't just motivational language or positive thinking. It's essentially grounded in psychological research about behavior and performance.
Yes, very, very much so. The studies consistently showed patterns. When individuals actually believed ability was fixed, they were more likely to avoid difficulty, withdraw from challenges, and interpret setbacks as actual evidence of inadequacy.
Okay.
But when individuals believed ability could grow, they were more likely to persist, to seek feedback, and to view those challenges as part of development rather than actually as a threat to their identity. So, after establishing that theoretical foundation, the really important work becomes applying it into everyday life.
Okay.
Because mindset isn't abstract, it shows up in how we interpret our own experiences.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I guess many of us wouldn't consciously describe ourselves as having a fixed mindset, yet
Yeah.
you're suggesting it reveals itself in subtle ways. So, how does it actually show up in daily life?
Well, actually, Leanne, it often shows up in just ordinary language. It can appear in phrases such as, I'm just not good at that,
Okay.
or I've never been academic, I'm not leadership material, or I can't cope with change. So these statements feel factual. They feel like objective truths,
Okay.
but in most cases, they're actually just interpretations. They're narratives that we form over time through experience, feedback, comparison, and even actually a single event. And once we repeat that narrative often enough, it begins to feel like identity.
So, these statements become less about behavior and more about who we believe we are.
Exactly. That's exactly it. The shift from I struggled with this to I'm not capable of this is subtle but significant.
Mm.
One describes an experience, the other actually describes identity. And when something becomes part of identity, we defend it, even if it limits us.
So why is it, do you think, that we cling to those limiting narratives, even, if they might be holding us back?
Uh, I think because certainty feels psychologically safe.
Okay.
If I decide that I'm not the type to do something, I actually remove the risk of trying and failing.
Sure.
Avoidance actually protects self-esteem in the short term. It shields us really from discomfort, embarrassment, or perceived judgment. But over time, actually, that protection becomes restrictive. We remain in spaces that feel controlled and predictable, which are often low risk spaces, but also they offer low growth.
Okay. And, change seems to amplify that tension, particularly in professional life. New systems,
Mm.
new responsibilities, evolving expectations. Why does change feel so destabilizing for a lot of us?
Yeah, well, actually, I just think, change unsettles us because it introduces uncertainty. So, really, when we step into unfamiliar territory, maybe that could be a new role, new expectations, new responsibilities, the brain can interpret uncertainty as threat. Psychologically, we may experience increased anxiety, heightened alertness, and even that fight or flight response.
Okay.
What becomes crucial at that point is the meaning we attach to that discomfort. So, one interpretation of this might be this just proves that I'm not capable.
Mm.
Another might be actually, this is stretching me. This is allowing me to grow. So, actually, it's the same feeling, same story,
Hmm.
but we have that different outcome.
Okay. So that distinction feels incredibly important. The goal here isn't to eliminate anxiety or discomfort altogether.
No, no, not at all. So, growth rarely feels comfortable. The aim is not to remove discomfort, but actually just to reframe it.
Mm.
If effort feels like evidence of inadequacy, we're going to withdraw.
Okay.
If effort feels like part of development, we're actually going to engage with it. So that subtle cognitive shift changes our behavior dramatically.
Okay. Feedback is another area where this
Mm,
plays out quite visibly. Many people say that they welcome feedback,
yeah.
but emotionally it can still feel exposing. So, why is it, do we think that feedback is such a powerful trigger?
Well, I think really because feedback is where mindset actually becomes visible.
Sure.
If I believe my ability defines me, feedback is going to feel like a judgment
Mm.
of the person who I am.
Hmm.
That can lead to defensiveness, shame, and actually disengagement. However, if I believe ability develops over time, feedback actually can become information
Mm.
and it's no longer a verdict of my identity. It may it may still feel uncomfortable,
Mm.
but it becomes information to work with actually, and not a statement of worth. The key difference is, I would say, emotional safety.
Okay. So you've mentioned interpretation several times, and that feels like really closely aligned with cognitive behavioral
Yeah,
principles.
definitely.
The idea that events themselves don't create emotions, but the meaning that we attach to them.
Exactly. Yes, that principle aligns closely with mindset work. An event occurs, we interpret it. That interpretation shapes our emotional response and behavior. So let's have a look at that. So, for example, you've made a mistake.
Hmm.
Your automatic thought is, do you know what? I'm useless.
Yeah.
I'm useless at this. And the emotion that we might attach to that could be shame, anxiety, withdrawal. But actually, if the interpretation shifts to that actually didn't go as planned,
Mm.
actually, what can I learn from that? The emotional response becomes constructive rather than paralyzing. The event hasn't changed, but actually, it's the meaning to the event that's changed.
I mean, that sounds straightforward in theory, but in reality, our thoughts often feel automatic and unquestionable. How do we begin to challenge them?
Yeah, well, really, with awareness and actually with gentle curiosity, we might ask, is this absolutely true? Have I developed skills in other areas before? Or
Mm.
maybe what evidence do I have for and against this belief? What would I attempt if I believed that actual improvement was possible?
Okay.
And actually, even just adding the word yet,
Mm.
I don't understand this yet, introduces flexibility. It keeps development open rather than closing it.
Okay, so bringing this back to our professional environment,
Yeah.
particularly healthcare or maybe even education, why is this particularly important?
Um, I think because these environments are actually dynamic and evolving. If we believe competence is something we should already fully possess,
Mm,
we hide uncertainty. We avoid asking questions. We protect reputation rather than prioritizing that actual learning.
mm,
However, if we view competence as something that can develop continuously over time, we will remain open to reflection, to dialogue, and supervision. And it's that openness that creates those safer workspaces and really ultimately safer care.
There's something quite compassionate about this approach, both towards ourselves and others.
Oh, absolutely. There really is, Leanne. Um, I think a growth orientated perspective encourages compassion for others, recognizing that colleagues are actually learning too. Um, Compassion for ourselves, about allowing development rather than demanding perfection.
Mm.
Growth, it's not about relentless self improvement or constant striving. It's actually about realistic belief in potential. I think what is really important and to bring across here is that you do not have to be the ultimate best at something, but it's about just being the best at what you can be through that continued development.
Okay, and if someone listening recognizes some fixed narratives in themselves,
Yeah.
what would you encourage them to consider?
Um, I think what I would say is notice the story you tell yourself about your own ability.
Mm,
When you hear, I can't do this, I'm not that kind of person, I'll never be able to get this, just pause. Ask whether that story is protecting you or whether it's limiting you.
mm,
Because while circumstances are not always within our control, the meaning we assign to them is within our control.
sure.
And over time, that meaning is going to shape your behavior. Behavior shapes experience, experience shapes identity. If we can shift the meaning, we can actually shift the trajectory.
Absolutely. That feels like a really sort of thoughtful and powerful place to end. Thank you, Tracy, for sitting down and giving us such an insightful and reflective discussion around this topic.
You're welcome.
It's a really important one for everybody in their everyday life, whether that be their personal life or their professional life. Um,
Absolutely.
and to everyone listening, perhaps today is an opportunity to move from certainty to curiosity. Join us next time for another topic.
Thank you.